Hi, my name is Alex, and in this episode of Magic Missile Minis, I'm going to be walking you through how I made my dungeon system for my modular mansion project. So, the first thing I wanted to do was create a prototype for the tiles and the walls that I was going to make. I start by cutting out two 6cm squares, since all of the squares I'm going to be using for this are going to be 3 centimeters. The way that I did the tiles was by cutting a little divot from out between the squares, using my X-Acto blade to make two cuts at an angle about 1/2 centimeter apart from each other, as you can see me doing here. And then I go ahead and repeat this around the rest of the tile, making the other line in this 4x4 square, as well as trimming the edges. I then go ahead and glue that onto another piece of foam core that we cut out earlier. And I think I also realized that I didn't mention the material I'm using is foam core, which you can generally get at any art store. I then go ahead and cut two more squares that I'm going to use for the walls, again, each of them being 6 centimeters wide. And the way I'm going to do these walls is that on the end of every single wall, there will be a pillar. And I'm going to cut slits into that pillar that other wall segments will be able to attach to. And so here you can see me cutting out the pieces that I'm going to use for that. The pieces that I cut out are 12 millimeters wide, and the reason for that is that the foam core I'm using is 3 millimeters thick, and when I add 2 extra pieces to each of the wall segments I'm making, it'll add up to 12 millimeters wide on one side of the pillar, and this way it will be square. And so I then go ahead and glue the pieces that I cut out onto each side of my wall piece. Then, as I mentioned before, I cut some slits into it, making sure that they are in the exact middle of the pillar that I just added to the end of this wall. I then go ahead and cut out a piece of cardstock, again 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters, and this is how all of the walls are going to slot together. I measure out a 3 millimeter outcropping that I'm going to use and a 6 millimeter outcropping I'm going to use for connecting into other walls and then connecting into the floor respectively. And so with a little bit of a glue, I go ahead and attach this in between the two wall sections that I've just made. So then with the prototype for the walls done, I go ahead and cut some slits in between the squares of the tiles I had made beforehand. And so here you can kind of see how this dungeon system is going to work, using the cardstock as little sliding connectors so that I can put everything together and have it stay there. I also was realizing though that the tile that I had made with the slits in it wasn't very sturdy, so I go ahead and cut another square of cardstock and glue that onto the bottom of the tile for support. And with the prototype finished, I can start working on something a little bit bigger. Here you can see me cutting out a massive piece of foam core and going ahead to do the same thing that I was doing with the prototype, cutting out the little wedges in between the squares and gluing 2 pieces of foam core together and then putting a piece of cardstock underneath it for support. But unlike the prototypes, I wanted to give this a little bit more texture. So with a ball of tinfoil, I go over the entirety of this square of tiles to give it a stony texture, which has a really cool effect, as you can see here. And then the next step is to go ahead and make a bunch more of those wall sections, cutting up a bunch more 6x6 squares, but also making them look like stone bricks. And the way that I do this is I take one of my sharper, like knife sculpting tools and start cutting divots into the foam core. And that way it starts to look a little bit like a wall of large stone blocks. After that, I go ahead and do the same thing I did on the tiles, texturing it with a tinfoil ball so it has the same rough coarseness that stone has. And then I go ahead and repeat that process so that I have a bunch of wall sections that I can start to work on, and assemble them the same way that I did the prototype. I then also go ahead and start working on a doorway. It's not particularly difficult. I just measure out a section that I want to cut out of one of these wall sections that I made beforehand, as you can notice specifically before I've added this stone texture. And then I go ahead with a round miniature base to get a nice curve over the doorway. And then, of course, going in with a craft knife, I cut out this shape, repeating this process as exactly as possible on the other side of this wall segment. After that, I go ahead and cut out a piece of cardstock that I can put in between the two pieces that we just made and can still work within our dungeon system. And then I can go ahead and do the same thing that I did with the other pieces of wall, texturing them to make them look like stacked stone, and then texturing them with a tinfoil ball in the same way that I did before. The other kind of wall that I wanted to try to make was that of a cage. Because let's be honest, it's not a real dungeon if it doesn't have a couple cells with some barred gates. Because let's be honest, it's not an actual dungeon if it doesn't have a couple cells. So I cut out an L piece for the main part of the wall and pillar, and cut out some thinner pieces of foam core that are going to go in between the round bars. And for those round bars, I'm going to be using some wooden skewers that I chop up into 3 different equal-sized lengths, using superglue to attach those bars to the pieces of foam core we had cut out just before, as you can see me doing here. I then just continue to repeat the process until I have a small barred door that is now finally ready to be attached to the rest of the wall piece that we had made for it earlier. And again, I just go in with a little bit of hot glue on either side to attach the two together. With all the different wall sections I wanted to make, I go ahead with some of the Mod Podge and go over all of the wall sections and tiles that I've made to act as a primer. That way I can start painting them, starting by hitting everything with a basic just mid-tone gray, but then going in with a little bit of brown and hitting some of the bricks that I've added. What this does is help make sure that the walls have a natural feel, since stones are almost never a uniform color. And then I also hit the bars with a black. Then I can go ahead and give everything a white dry brush. And this helps get all of the highlights onto the texture that we gave these stone walls with the tinfoil ball. And then to finish everything off, I do a black wash over everything. And this again helps to accentuate the texture that we added and gets in all the cracks and makes them nice and pitch black. And with that done, the project is finished. I'm really happy with how this dungeon system worked out. It looks exactly how I envisioned in my head, which so rarely happens with a lot of the projects that I work on. They're usually somewhat like what I wanted, but not exactly what I was looking for. Also, if you guys like this series that I'm doing on the mansion project, leave it in a comment below and kind of let me know, give me some feedback if you have any ideas for stuff that I could add for the project, because in truth, I don't have every single detail ironed out yet. But anyways, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified of when I release new videos. And once again, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.